evening to everybody. It's a beautiful night. It's good to see everyone. Military honors, those are a special thing. If you don't mind, just let's take a minute here. Let's talk about some. What's a military honor that stands out to you? Something you might be awarded for your courage, for your bravery, for your sacrifice. Anything come to mind? Okay, good. That's what I was thinking. So injury, right? On the battlefield. So a Purple Heart. Any others? Okay, for saving somebody? Excellent. I was thinking about battle stars. Okay, and I don't know if that's something that's still done. I've mentioned before, but I know my grandpa won several of those in World War II. And so yeah, there's several different honors. What's the highest one of all? The Medal of Honor. Very good. It's the one that you see right here, front and center. Who would award that, the Medal of Honor? At least who do we see often giving the Medal of Honor? Yeah, President, the Commander-in-Chief, right? That's a special thing whenever you talk about heroes and their sacrifices and awards that are given for that. I say that as a lead-in to where we're going to be tonight in 2 Samuel chapter 23. So if you'll turn there, we're going to be in 2 Samuel 23. And we're going to be talking more this evening about the heroes of David, and especially those who served in a military capacity for him. There are all of these individuals who seem to be worthy of honor, but you might say that some are worthy of a medal of honor given by their commander-in-chief, the King David. I will mention also, I told you last week, I know it's kind of strange. We've skipped from the end of chapter 21 to 23. There's a reason for that. This is a little bit thematic. And then we're going to go back to chapter 22 and bleed back into the beginning of 23. And we have a couple of songs that David wrote that we're going to explore there. But if you look back at the list in 2 Samuel 21, this seems to be more late in David's reign. And it's involving skirmishes with the Philistines. And we're going to have skirmishes with the Philistines here also. But this appears to be more early on in David's reign. So we're in verse 8 of 2 Samuel 23. Oh man, it's going to be rough tonight, I'll tell you that. There are a lot of names. Thankfully not as many early, but you look at the end and it's rough. We might just give up by that point. We'll see. So verse 8 of 2 Samuel 23. These are the names of the mighty men whom David had. Bosheb, Boshebeth, the Tachmonite, chief among the captains. Okay, this is one of the guys here who stands out. He was called Adino the Eznite because he had killed 800 men at once. A couple of things about this guy. Adino, I found this a little interesting. There has to be something to this. I looked it up, and what I found was Adino means his ornament. So what does that tell you? His ornament. Meaning of Adino. What's the purpose of an ornament? It's a display. It's beautiful. It's something you want to show. And if you're talking about a person, this is the ideal one, right? You want to show him off. You're talking about trained assassins. This guy stands out above the rest because he killed 800 men all in one setting. That's very impressive. He was the chief among the captains. Now, the second part of this, the Eznite, James Strong, in his exhaustive Greek and Hebrew dictionary, says the meaning, like a lot of our Hebrew words, is uncertain here, although the leaning seems to be sharp, strong, or spear. And that would make a lot of sense. It could be that he's the one who spearheads attacks. Okay, he's sharp or he's on point when he does so. He's strong in his advance, but this much is for sure. He's the Adino of the bunch. He's the ornament of the king. This is the one you want to show off. So he killed 800 men at one time. Who else do we know in the Bible and Old Testament warriors who killed a lot of guys in a single setting? Okay, that's the one that came to my mind. Did you have another one? Okay, David, yeah, right. So Samson stands out. How many do we have with Samson in one setting? It's a lot. Well, now, dealing with at his death, and he kills more at his death and pushing the pillars and collapsing than during his life. Okay, so, could be. The episode that stood out in my mind was before that. Okay, the jawbone, right? He's like, this will work right here. Grabs a jawbone, and these Philistines aren't pushovers, I don't think, either. Probably soldiers themselves, and kills 1,000 of them in one setting with a jawbone. And we talk about Samson all the time because of this terrific feat. Well, this is a guy who's like Samson, but undoubtedly, lacks some of that strength that he had. This is a bad dude. Josheb-Boshebeth, the Tachmonite. And I'm telling you, all the names are this way. But he was chief among the captains, killed 800 men at one time. He's the shiny ornament of the king. That's the meaning of Adino. Verse 9, and after him, I'm going to encourage us to keep track of these as we go through. We have one so far, right? After him was Eleazar, the son of Dodo, probably, or Dada, perhaps, the Ahahite, one of the 3 mighty men with David when they defied the Philistines who were gathered there for battle, and the men of Israel had retreated. So of these guys that we're going to be reading tonight, there are 3 of them that stand out. And I think this section is given because in literary fashion, these are going to be like recipients of the Medal of Honor given by the commander-in-chief, King David. So the second one is Eleazar. And we're going to look at our map right up here. And I know the writing's kind of small on it. This is the best one that I could find. There were some other ones, but this is pretty descriptive. Hopefully from your positioning you can look around and see one that somewhat stands out. But if nothing else, you can tell it's this box right here, verses 9 and 10, and it's going over to near Azekah. And I'll tell you that there's a good cross-reference to this that you could turn to and you could read. We're probably not going to take a lot of time to do that this evening, but that's found in 1 Kings chapter 11, or excuse me, 1 Chronicles. 1 Chronicles chapter 11, there's a parallel and it gives a little more information, including about some of the locations, and we don't find a lot about the locations right here. So that's the second to bottom box right here, verses 9 and 10, and it goes over to Azekah, somewhat in the heart, a little bit south, though, in the Promised Land. So that's Eleazar, the son of Dodo, and that's one of the 3 mighty men who helped to defy the Philistines. Verse 10, back in our text, 2 Samuel 23. He, that is Eleazar, arose and attacked the Philistines until his hand was weary. Have you ever done something for so long, some kind of task, some kind of work, and it just physically wears you out? Maybe it's with your hands. I wouldn't call this work, but there's something that comes to mind. White bass fishing in Oklahoma. No kidding. There are days out there, and you're catching 1 to 2 pound white bass, when they're really going. And you're doing it on ultralights, like 4 pound, 6 pound test line, and then it's in that current that's pouring out from below a dam, and you got to fight every one of those in. And there are days that each of you will catch about 100 of these fish. It's all day long. And I'm telling you, I've had times, I've had them hooked and they're out in the current and I can keep my line tight and I just got to take my hand off and kind of, shake it. And I've even told my brother before, man, I'm tired. My hand is worn out from reeling these things in. Well, this isn't play, okay? This is work. And this guy has been fighting on the battlefield and he attacks the enemy, the Philistines, until his hand is worn out. In fact, we're told that his hand stuck to the sword. Now, why do you think his hand would stick to the sword? I see a couple of possibilities here. Why would his hand stick to the sword? Okay. Now, again, this is a poor example compared to the difficult work this guy had. But most of you know, I've said this a number of times. I worked on a golf course for 3 summers. And 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And this is as a kid, so you really think it's terrible back then. I ran a weed eater almost the entire time. And you know what it's like even just when you weed eat for about an hour straight. A lot of it's a vibration. But, I'm telling you, as a kid, man, my forearms and my back and my neck, that first week it'd kill you. And then you kind of get broken in, and it wasn't so bad after that, holding and doing that all day long. But yeah, you get to where your muscles are frozen, and it's just hard to even bend your fingers back out This guy's been fighting with a heavy sword, killing people with it all day long. All right, second possibility for the sword sticking to the hand. Okay, whenever you swipe that and blood, I'm not trying to be, grotesque here, but blood comes, all over the place from a sword and it gets on your hand, blood has a sticky residue, doesn't it? So it may be a combination of these things, or it might just be one of these two that's attended. This guy, Eleazar, the second of three chief or mighty men who really stand out. His hand was weary from attacking the Philistines. His hand stuck to the sword, probably his muscles maybe as well, from all the dried blood. Man's man. The Lord brought about a great victory that day, and the people returned after him, but only to plunder. I'm not too sure that they were quite as brave as what this guy was. Medal of honor, you might say, literally speaking, awarded by the king. Verse 11, after him was Shema, the son of Agi, the Herorite. The Philistines had gathered together into a troop where there was a piece of ground full of lentils. What would that be, do you think? Ground full of lentils. Do you have anything else in your version? One translates it peas. Also saw James Smith, who's excellent, outstanding in Hebrew, says beans is the leaning that he has there. The short is this: there's a crop, okay? So why do you think it is that these Philistines had gathered together into this area where there's a ground that's full of some kind of crop? Turn back to Judges chapter 6, keeping your place right here. This struck a chord with me. I recall this from our study into these leaders of God's people. Back in the Judges in the 6th chapter, and this is a little more pre-Philistine here, but we read that in verse 1 of Judges 6, the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hand of Midian for 7 years. And the hand of Midian overpowered Israel, and because of Midian, the people of Israel made for themselves the dens that are in the mountains and the caves and the strongholds. For whenever the Israelites planted crops, the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them. Well, they're really interested in that food, aren't they? And unfortunately, we find in verse 4, they would encamp against them and devour the produce of the land as far as Gaza, and they would leave no sustenance in Israel, and no sheep or ox or donkey. For they would come up with their livestock and their tents. They would come up like locusts in number. Both they and their camels could not be counted, so that they laid waste the land as they came in. And Israel was brought very low. The economy crashed because of Midian. And the people of Israel cried out for help to the Lord. Now, as we return to our text in 2 Samuel 23 in the 11th verse, we find that the Philistines had gathered together into a troop. And they came where there was this piece of ground full of crop. Oh, opportunists, aren't they? They're wanting to plunder the harvest. Remember, the agricultural society. And so this is their whole economy. It'd be like cyber warfare among us and just taking over the economy of the United States. And the people, they're scared to death. They flee, as they often do, from the Philistines. But in verse 12, he stationed himself in the middle of the field, right out in the open. Doesn't seem to be afraid of being observed. He defended it, so he's protecting the crop, and also he killed the Philistines. So the Lord brought about a great victory. So we've encountered how many people so far? 3. Very good. So back in verse 8, we have Josheb, Bashabeth, the Tachmonite. And then in verse 9, we have Eleazar, son of Dodo, the Ahohite. And then we have in verse 11, Shema, the son of Agi, the Herorite. And these are 3 guys who really tend to stand out. I think these might be kind of your Medal of Honor winners in the viewpoint of the king. So let's continue on, though, down into verse 13. Then 3 of the 30 chief men. I'm curious, by the way. I didn't check all the different translations on this. Is there anything that, or any of them that read differently than 3 of the 30 chief men? Okay, I am curious about that. Because I think it could be read 2 different ways. I'm curious as we go through to get your take on it also. Is this referring to the same 3 guys of whom we just read, or is this the 3 additional? Because we're going to get a 3 additional. You get these sets of them in this stretch. Verse 13, then 3 of the 30 chief men went down at harvest time and came to David at the cave of Adullam. And we've encountered this a number of times up to this point. And so they go down in verses 13 through 15. You can see, you might not be able to. Adullam on the map. This is this bottom box. And if you trace the needle over, that's going to take you to the town of Adullam. And so they came to David, these 3 of 30 chief men come to David at the cave of Adullam. And the troop of Philistines encamped in the valley of Rephaim. And this isn't going to be just all that far away from here, in the valley of Rephaim. Okay, so I want to talk about this. Rephaim, this is something thanks to my good brother who brought this up last week. Or Rephaim, you might pronounce it also. Does that ring a bell at all? Rephaim. Okay, what comes to mind when you hear that? Giants, very good. So we have Rephaim, and they're also the Nephilim, and that's the Genesis 6 and Numbers 14. And John mentioned last week, I'd totally forgotten about this one. He said, it seems like there's a name that starts with A and it's 4 letters, and something about the giants. I said, that could be, but that doesn't strike a chord just at the moment. And I was thinking that it didn't. And afterward, he looked up and he said it, and I said, yes, you're exactly right. The Anakim. How about that? Anakim. And they're descendants of Anak. A-N-A-K. He's right. It was a letter A, and it's 4 letters. And so Anak is singular. Whenever you put im in Hebrew on the end, that's about like our S in English. And that means plural. So when you have Nephilim, that refers to the giants, the big people, but the im makes it plural. Also in the Bible, you have seraph and cherub, seems to be the angelic host. That's singular. But cherubim, probably cherubim is better, and seraphim, that makes it plural. So I say that to say this. The fact the valley of Rephaim would refer to the people as giants and plural, okay, a multiplicity of them. The Philistines have congregated in this place. We know the Philistines, they have giants. Okay, I had a really good thought also that was brought out by Paul last week. It wasn't in class, but it was afterward. He said, I noticed in the ESV when we were going through in chapter 21 about the sons of the giant. Did any of your versions read differently than the giant? The English Standard Version there, if I'm not mistaken, and check me on this, the English Standard Version there, I believe, reads of the giants. And so that could lead to some of the differences in viewpoints, that these weren't the children, the 4 descendants of a certain giant, but of the giants in general. And I said, that's interesting. I didn't realize that. So I went back and I checked all of our major versions, and most of our, especially word-for-word and circulated ones, all read giant, singular. Okay, does anyone have ESV out to double-check that? Is that right? Yeah, check that if you will. Okay. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'll tell you what. Just let me look here really quickly. I'm sure it is, but I don't want to misquote it. And I checked it. I want to double. Back in chapter 21, and it should be at the very end, is one of the references. Yep. Plural. Okay. Yeah. And I was sure that was the case, but I didn't want to misquote anything, and I wanted to again really double, probably better triple check it. Yeah, chapter 21, and at the end in verse 20, descended from the giants. 21, descended from the giants, plural, in Gath. Okay, so point is this, though. I checked a number of our translations. The only one that I noticed of the main circulated. Now, there are some lessers that do read that way also. And I don't know if you've ever looked much into Hebrew and into the just structure of words. It's tough. And that was my experience with it. Greek's a whole lot easier than what Hebrew is. But so I was able to find, though, a very good resource that identifies all kinds of things about different words, like I have in Greek, but I don't really have something quite like that out of a personal copy in Hebrew. But I was able to find it and look into it. And this word in 2 Samuel 21, the noun is a singular noun. And so it's ref is what the word is. And it is properly translated giant. So just in case you'd noticed that, it's not saying in 2 Samuel 21 that he descended, or these four descended from the giants generally, but it's a very specific one giant from whom these four descended. And so I do believe that interpretation that we discussed last week's correct on that. But I wanted to bring that out as we're getting into a discussion of the giants again in chapter 23. 2 Samuel 23, verse 13. We've read 3 of the 30 chief men, same ones or new ones, we'll consider, went down at harvest time. They come to David at the cave of Adullam, as we've shown on the map, and the troop of Philistines encamped in the valley of Rephaim, or in the place of the giants. That's scary. Verse 14, David was then in the stronghold, and the garrison of the Philistines was then in Bethlehem, and that's where we're given the indication. And if you look on the map, that is the bottom box and the needle that goes over to the left for Adullam. That's going to be to our right, and it's not that much up and to the right. You have the third box over here. That's where the Philistine garrison is hanging out, roughly, give or take, just about 10 miles away from one another. So these groups are positioned, they're preparing to do battle. And verse 15, David said with longing, "Oh, that someone would give me a drink of the water from the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate." I think David's reminiscing about his yesteryears. Let's not forget, what's the connection of David and Bethlehem? That's where he's born, and he's thinking about back in the day. You know, I can still, whenever I think about it, we have pretty good water at our house. It goes through a whole house filtration system, and then it goes through a filter on our fridge. I'm very picky about my water. It's county water. It's not terrible, but it's not great either, let me tell you. I need 2, not 1 filter before I'll drink that stuff. Otherwise, just give me a bottle of it. All right? I grew up on well water. Anybody identify with that? Anybody still have well water? I envy you, okay? But that's what I grew up on. And once you've grown up on that, you know, nothing else is quite the same. And I'll also tell you, I will never forget the taste of the water coming straight out of our well when you turn the faucet. I remember we had a preacher who came in for a gospel meeting, and he came over for dinner at our house. And, of course, he was asked, "Well, what do you want to drink?" And he knew he's on a farm, you know, and he said, "If you don't mind," he said, "I know there probably isn't any difference, but," he said, "could I get some water out of that well house that you showed me earlier?" So we had to go out of the house. It's the same stuff that was coming through the house, you know, in the faucet, but there's just something about that one from that location and from the well. And that's what David is thinking. Oh, man, my younger years, you know, there's a lot of good water, but there's nothing like the water that I remember as a kid from the well of Bethlehem by the gate. There's the special water right there. If only I had a drink of that stuff. Verse 16. So the 3 mighty men broke through the camp of the Philistines. Okay, so these guys are at the cave of Adullam over to the right, and they travel about 10 miles up to the northeast to Bethlehem. They have to bust through this stronghold of Philistines that's there just to go draw water from the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate, and they took it and they bring it all the way back to their king, David. These are men's men. I think there's a good chance it would probably go back to the 3 mightiest of all men who were given the Medal of Honor by the king. I think the king was just expressing a wish, is all it was. But these men respect their leader so much that any wish of the king becomes their command. And so they go and they get this water, and this is mind-boggling to me. Nevertheless, he would not drink it, but poured it out. These guys have risked their lives and their families on a whim of their king. And they bring it back and probably like, man, this is incredible. And doesn't even take a drink of the stuff. It's not out of disrespect. It's out of tremendous respect. He's a nobler man than to do such a thing. Verse 17. And he said, far be it from me, O Lord, that I should do this. What I hold in my hand, is this not the blood of the men who went in jeopardy of their lives? I don't think he really asked for this. He was just saying, oh, man, we're so thirsty and we've been working so hard. If I could have a drink of the well of my childhood home. Therefore, he would not drink it out of respect for those men. He just valued their blood too much to do that. These things were done by the three mighty men. These are impressive guys who serve in David's army. Okay, now in verse 18, we're going to change course a little bit here. Now, Abishai, the brother of Joab, we know all about this guy up to this point. Abishai, the brother of Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was chief of three. I didn't read it as the New King James translates it. It has the word another in italics. And he's the chief of another three, the New King James reads. But that's been added. Really, it's just he's chief of three. But as we're going to see borne out while we go down, I think it actually is accurately translated to convey the ideas, and the translators are helping us out right here. This is another three, I believe. Yeah, go ahead. I did notice that, a variance. I wonder if it's a textual. I didn't look at there's so many of those things of the slight. Yeah, I'll check it and make sure. If you have it, Phil, if you have any kind of resource handy. Okay. And I had exactly the same thought. Yeah, multiple of three. But I was like you, I did notice the difference in the two. Yeah, there are a lot of these just slight nuances in 3 and 30, and yeah, many like that. So he lifted his spear. He's chief of three, or maybe another three. Chief of 30? Okay, possible too. He lifted his spear against 300, killed them, and of course he won a name among these three. Okay, out of curiosity, it probably reads among these 30 the second time. I didn't check it for a second. Okay, sorry. A guy can only do so much at once, right, Joe? Yeah. 30 again, I figured it did, yeah. And that should be, because that is a comparison back to, so that makes some sense. Okay. Yeah, and we do find 30 as we go on also. So, but yeah, if you don't care, just at your convenience, Joe, let us know when you come across that. They won a name among these three, or perhaps 30 is what we're considering. Verse 19, was he, though, not the most honored of the three? All right, so is that 30? You got it. Okay, all right. Just curious. All right. So is he not the most honored of three? Therefore, he became their captain. However, he did not attain to the three. And again, the New King James here inserts a word, first. And I do believe that's implied, the first three. So, here's what's going on. We have three who are the cream of the crop, and they're like the Medal of Honor recipients. And now we have another three that are very special, and they're going to get awards too, but not like those who won the Medal of Honor. So there's a new set of three. And we have one so far who's been discussed. I think number here is going to be significance. Abishai, the brother of Joab. So we're in verse 20, and then we find out Benaiah, who is the son of Jehoiada. He was the son of a valiant man from Kabzeel, who had done many deeds. He had killed 2 lion-like heroes of Moab. And not just is he a killer of the lion-like, but he appears to be a killer of lions also. He had gone down and killed a lion in the midst of a pit. The legend grows here. The man, the myth, the legend. And he did that on a snowy day. That's so cool, isn't it? So you have this guy who not just kills a lion, like David, probably, I'm sure others had also, who doesn't just kill but he essentially goes into a cage match, enters into a pit, cage match with a lion, and he kills the lion. And if that's not enough, why would it impress you so much that he did it on a snowy day? What's characteristic of snow and fighting? I think of sports, and you're watching two teams. I'm sorry, John. Okay, and blood, yeah. If you're watching two teams play sports and the snow's coming down in an outdoor venue, it is a mess. In football, you have all kinds of slips and miscues and fumbles. And, well, that's probably the case here. Just imagine how hard it would be, number one, to kill a lion, you versus a lion. Number two, what if you were put in a cage to fight a lion? And number three, the cage is outside and the snow's coming down and you're sliding and the lion has claws to help grip. So, again, these are men's men. I mean, there's something about these guys that's very special. Verse 21, and in addition to that, he killed an Egyptian. The New King James says, a spectacular man. Well, that's an interesting descriptor. I did look this one up, and what I found on this, and I'll mention the English Standard Version on this one, it reads, a handsome man. I don't know if that would be the meaning. Maybe it is. But I looked up the meaning of the original word, and what seems to stand out in its connotation is sight or spectacle. This man was a sight, or he was a spectacle. And I don't think it's probably just he's a good-looking guy that he killed. Well, you know, he might not be that impressive, but I think he's a sight to behold. He was a spectacle to watch. This is somebody probably who nobody can take out. I think that's probably the meaning of this spectacular man. He was an Egyptian in nationality. This is a pretty good story of itself. The Egyptian had a spear in his hand. So he went down to him, this Benaiah, with a staff, like a shepherd's instrument, with a guy who's got a weapon in his hand. He goes down to him with a staff, wrested the spear out of the Egyptian's hand, and then he killed him with his own spear. Essentially, he kills this guy that nobody could take out without a weapon. That's how impressive he is. All right, I want to ask this now. Does that sound like anybody you know goes out to fight and really doesn't even have a true weapon? I mean, there's something. But it goes out to fight, and the only way that the guy's going to be killed is if you take his weapon and do him in with it. David, when did he do that? Yeah, he goes out, and remember the giant making fun of, what are you, a dog? You're coming out here with sticks to play a game with? Who are you? Are you guys joking? And he walks out with a slingshot, looking like Dennis the Menace. And he knocks the guy down, but the Bible mentions that he has no sword to kill him with. He doesn't take a true weapon out there with him. And so he goes and he takes the sword out of the sheath of Goliath and uses it to cut off his own head. I think this is a guy after David's own heart right here. Very impressive. One of three special individuals. Now, not a Medal of Honor recipient, okay, like the other. Don't attain to the other three. But he's kind of in his own criterion in second place. Verse 22, these things Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, did, and he won a name among these three mighty men. He was more honored than the 30. Okay, now we have some 30. What does yours read, Joe? Or what do you? Okay, Shane, what do you have there? Oh, you're okay, you're okay. So we're in verse 23. Yeah, sorry, I sent you guys in tasks, I know. Okay, so he's more honored than the 30. All right. Okay, so very similar to mine. Okay, yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. I was just wondering how that would be there. So he's more honored than the 30. But, you see, not a Medal of Honor recipient, did not attain to the first three. And David appointed him over his guard. Okay, so from this point, we're just going to kind of move on. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, and I believe also, if I'm not mistaken, about Goliath Jr., the same statement is made. I think that's pretty common for the giants. Yeah, very good. And it goes back to Rephaim again, in the location, the Valley of Giants. There's several of them still around. Not nearly as many as what there once were. Joshua and company took care of most of them. But there is a pocket of them that's remained, and David and men are going to finish those guys off. Thanks for that, Rebecca. Good insight, everybody. Okay, so verse 23. He was more honored than the 30, but he did not attain to the first 3. David appointed him over his guard. And we're just going to move on now, essentially, from this point, it seems. But this observation has been made. It may be that a third is not identified right here. And if that's the case, any ideas as to who the third might be and his name not brought up? Okay, it may be. Yeah, turn back to chapter 19. Very good, Marty. So same book, but just to chapter 19. We'll read this here quickly. 2 Samuel 19, verses 5 through 7. This is after this 4-letter named guy has murdered the king's son. Well, I mean, differences, viewpoints there. Certainly this defied the orders of the king. Joab came into the house of the king, and he reprimands him, and he says, "You have today covered with shame the faces of all your servants who saved your life." And you go down into verse 11. King David sent this message to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Verse 13, "Say to Amasa, are you not my bone and my flesh? God do so to me and more also, if you are not commander of my army from now on in place of the guy who'd killed his son, Joab." You go back to our text and there are these mentionings of Abishai, the brother of Joab. Later, verse 24, Asahel, the brother of Joab. All these guys are mentioned for these military honors. But the guy who served for decades as the commander of the king's forces, not mentioned. I think that he could be the third of the 3 that remains unmentioned in that second tier, and perhaps in shame for how he had disobeyed the king and what he had done to his son. So that's an idea. Verse 24, Asahel, the brother of Joab, see, we have a lot of mentionings of Joab, but not Joab himself, was one of these 30 mighty men. You have Elhanan, Shema, Elika, Helez, Ira, Abiezer. Mebunni is what I want to say, but I don't think that's it. I think it's Mebunai, more likely. Zalmon, Heleb, and I'm not going to say who they're from and their daddies, okay? Ittai, Benaiah, Hiddai, Abi Albon, Eliabah, Jonathan, Shammah, Ahiam, Eliphalet, that's always a tough one for me to say, Eliphalet, Eliam, I skipped over Hashbai. Down in verse 35, Hezrai, Peerai, Igal, Bani, Zelek, Neharai, Ira, Gareb. Oh, and who would like to say our memory verse at the end? 37 men, whenever you go through and you count them all. And the last one who's mentioned, Uriah the Hittite. Why is it this guy is brought up, and why is he the one to close the list? Why would a military honor be given to him? It might be that just through the course of his life did a lot of great things for the king. He probably did. Or it might be something more than that. Turn to 2 Samuel, the 11th chapter, and we'll close on this. We're going to read verses 14 through 17. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. In the letter he wrote, "Set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting, and then draw back from him, that he may be struck down and die." And as Joab was besieging the city, he assigned Uriah to the place where he knew there were valiant men. And the men of the city came out and fought with Joab, and some of the servants of David among the people fell. Uriah the Hittite also died. This guy gave everything. He went on a suicide mission for the king. Now, this is no credit to the king himself, but it is a credit to this man that whatever the commander-in-chief does, he has so much respect for his king, he's going to do it even if he knows he's going to die. And it could be that Uriah ends up being a Medal of Honor winner to a degree posthumously, and he's rewarded for his heroic efforts and mentioned in these inspired records. I think there's a good lesson also that we can take out of this that, sometimes there's a great sacrifice that has to be given before we can receive an ultimate reward. Of course, we know very well about Jesus and how he's King of Kings, and he wears the golden crown in victory, and he reigns today. But first, he had to wear a crown of thorns before he could wear that victorious crown. We're told that we have the opportunity to wear the crown of victory ourselves. But before we get the privilege of being given that by the Lord one day, we're told to take up our cross and follow after Jesus in his footsteps. There's a great reward coming for those willing to do so. All right, any closing comments through the end of chapter 3? I know this is kind of a different one. You're just talking about like military leaders, and it gives a little bit of background also. Yes, ma'am, Rebecca. Good question. Very, very shortly, I will give a couple of places where there's some good reading. So Genesis 6 mentions there were giants in the land in those days when that happened, and also afterward. I think the answer to it's found in Genesis 18 and 19. Genesis 18 and 19, and Jude verse 6. And the short of it is this. I think there's a good case to be made about the strange flesh that was gone after, for which God rained down punishment. And we often point out about we interpret that as a homosexual side, and don't get me wrong, God doesn't tolerate it and will punish it. There's no doubt about that. I'm not sure if that's the chief sin that was punished in the area of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's just my personal opinion on that. Go ahead. Right. Yeah, good question. So it's a little loud. Is the question about, is the DNA still around maybe? Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, just in short, it's a great question. Genesis 6 mentions that happened, the offspring, in those days, and it says, and also afterward, or down the road, the same thing occurred for which God destroyed the planet. Genesis 18 and 19, involving Sodom and Gomorrah. I know that they're males that they're interested in, but I personally believe that the interest is that not the fact just that they're males, but also that they can tell they're different from everybody else. And they've been spying out that group, and I think they want to create another race like they did. And again, Jude 6, it mentions the condemnation. They went after strange flesh. And when else do you read about punishment that comes directly out of heaven other than in Genesis 6 when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and then also with Sodom and Gomorrah so I think it ties in and makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the short of it. Great question. So I hope that helps with some reading. We can talk more after about it too. So for next week, if you will, please read all of chapter 22 of 2 Samuel. Read the first 7 verses that we haven't covered of chapter 3. And we are going to memorize verse 4 of chapter 22. It might sound familiar based on the song that we sing. Verse 4 of chapter 22. Thanks.